Hi again then guys, and welcome to another relatively recent jump back to the past of the Gran Turismo franchise, to Gran Turismo 6 again, to a car which a lot of people have asked me to review actually at different times. It's the kind of car which could feasibly slot in a couple of different series. You could put it into heavy hitters with the SUVs and trucks, you could put it into party in the back with the wagons and estate cars. I'm actually going to save it though for random reviews, partially because I put the Renault Aventime in there as well, and it's a pretty good rival to that car, because it's not really an estate car, it's not really a truck or an SUV, it's a minivan, it's a people carrier, it's an MPV, a multi-purpose vehicle, so we haven't done a series just for those because there aren't enough cars to justify one. So we'll put it in random reviews again, just like with the Aventime, and potentially with a couple of others if we review those as well. Now, this car has kind of cult classic status in Gran Turismo 6 because it's just one of those oddball cars that isn't just different and kind of wacky looking, having this minivan on the game, but it's also actually a pretty cool car. It's a pretty quick one as well when you tune it. It's pretty good for drifting, it's good off-road because of the all-wheel drive, and it's more useful than something like the Aventime because with the front-wheel drive setup of that car, it just doesn't really feel like you're getting the most out of it. Whereas with the all-wheel drive on the Honda Odyssey, this car, of course, it feels like you just are getting a ton more use out of it. Almost like a really scaled-up Civic Type R to the point of being a minivan, and with all-wheel drive added. So, not exactly a bad combination to have. Now the engine on this one is a bit bigger than something like a Civic or a Prelude would sometimes have. It's a 2.4 litre, fully tuned, as of course all of these tunes for older Gran Turismo games are. You're looking at a really impressive 427 horsepower. That's a really healthy level to be working with. Again, for a minivan, of course, you've got to bear that in mind. You're also looking at 352 pound-feet of torque. Again, not too shabby. And I would say the best thing about this car, certainly the most deceptive, given the all-wheel drive, given the size, given the type of vehicle, is the weight. Even to begin with, it's not ridiculously heavy, because that's the thing about minivans and also traditional vans like work vans. They are physically large, but they're not like SUVs or luxury limos in as much as those cars are packed full of luxury and tech. Whereas if you cut a side profile of a van or a minivan, they're basically just a big empty box, sometimes with a few seats in the back, so the fact that they are lighter isn't too surprising. Now in the case of this one, you can drop the weight right down to 1,367 kilos, which is outstanding for a car of this kind of size, especially again with all-wheel drive, because that of course adds extra weight over front-wheel drive especially, but also rear-wheel drive as well. The horsepower per tonne in its fully tuned form is easily a sports car rivaling 312, and even the maximum PP level tuned up is only 492, so it's still below 500 of course, and well, if you wanted to try using it for racing, you certainly could. Back when I used to race this car, especially online, which was rare, I'll admit that, but when I did, I used to use it at 475 pp, because at that level, the cars aren't quite as overpowering against it in terms of, in particular, top-end power and speed, whereas at 500, you can get stuff more like sports cars, muscle cars to be putting out 350, 400 horsepower, whereas for this one, because it is bigger and heavier and more cumbersome, they'll allow it to have more power at that level. Now as far as the price, it's Japanese and it's a Honda, so you're probably not expecting it to be overly expensive, and it's not, it's just under 29 grand. That's a great level to be working with, and it's the kind of car which, for sure, just like the Honda Odyssey of the newer generation that was recently added to Forza as well, it's not a car for everyone, of course not. But that's the great thing about these kind of cars. They still add them into the game anyway. And Gran Turismo, in fact even more so than the Forza franchise I would say, has always done a great job of featuring cars like this. Ones which, if you ask the majority of the community, they'll probably say, I don't really care for that car. I don't really care if it's in the game, and some people might specifically not want it in the game. But they put them in. And the older games especially were great for that. Gran Turismo 2 and 4 in particular pioneered a lot of those cars. In fact, this car, were it a little bit older, or at least an older version of the Odyssey, it would have fitted in perfectly into the Gran Turismo 2 lineup. There are plenty of vehicles with this kind of utility, the pricing, the real-world value of it, if you will, like the kind of car that you can just see on the street fairly easily. Now for me, the main advantage of the Odyssey over other people movers or minivans, such as for instance the Caldina, which is an outstanding example of what some would call a wagon. The older one definitely is. I would call the one that's in the game more of a people mover, certainly in its shape. But definitely stuff like the Aventime, kind of the Mitsubishi Airtrack as well, but again, not so much. It kind of borderlines between SUV to some degree and also people mover or minivan. Not so much minivan, more MPV or crossover, even, I guess you could say. But the Odyssey has a great driving feel. It gives you tons of feedback, it's very light on its feet, and in a funny kind of way, it's actually similar to what the Ford Transit van was like in the real world, especially back in its inception, because one of the key selling points of the Ford Transit van was that it didn't handle like most other vans at the time. It handled more like a car, and it was deliberately designed to. It was more fun, it felt more sporty, and it just gave you more feedback. This Odyssey feels just like that, but in a different kind of sense, because of course it's a game, for a start, not the real world, and the car itself is different. It's not front-engine, front-wheel drive, it's front-engine, all-wheel drive. So overall, although just like the Daihatsu Midget that we reviewed last week, it's definitely not a car that everyone's going to use. In fact, most people probably won't. You might drive it once, you might buy it just to see what the tuning capabilities are, and unfortunately you can't tune it quite as high as you arguably should be able to, say 5 or even 600 horsepower, like the Caldina, which would be incredible. Imagine how quick this thing would be then. But it is still nice to know that you can, A, get the car in the game at all, which is cool in itself, but also make it actually a pretty quick car. It's good on-road, it's good off-road. Don't expect it, of course, to beat everything at whatever tuning level you decide to set it at, but it is a lot more competitive than it seems, and so is kind of the definition of a sleeper. If you're looking for the top-level minivan in the game, well, I would still give that to the Caldina. That's a monstrously quick car and can easily outrun this one, but at the same time, the Odyssey is a very worthy second place. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.